Ashes of Valor. A War of Love. Chapter 2. Shadows in Command. Episode 1. The Crown of Ash. The day Khal Rourke claimed the capital, the skies above Velmora turned grey, not from rain, but from the smoke of burning documents, crumbling statues, and the ash of history being rewritten. He stood atop the highest balcony of the Spire of Oaths, where the last legitimate High Chancellor had once ruled with trembling hands and diplomatic niceties. Now that balcony bore a new banner, a single obsidian phoenix rising through flame. Velmora, he declared, was reborn. The streets below were filled with orchestrated parades, tanks painted in ceremonial hues, soldiers marching in perfectly rehearsed patterns, and speakers broadcasting Khal's voice like scripture. But within the spire itself, the mood was far less celebratory. Khal's inner circle, commanders, tacticians, and political converts, gathered in the war chamber known as the Hall of Iron Tongues, named for its many betrayals. The war map glowed beneath their hands, tracking movements of Aurelia's flamebound resistance as they gained traction in the west. Khal didn't speak at first. He circled the room slowly, his boots echoing against the marble as the firelight glinted off the medals on his coat. General Varn, once a loyalist to the old council, broke the silence. The capital holds, but the western towns are slipping. Tarn Hal's shadow reaches further than we anticipated. Khal stared at the map, his jaw tight. Because she does what we failed to. Earn loyalty. Not demand it. Another officer, Commander Lyra Denvan, bristled. Then we should crush them before her image becomes a symbol. Khal looked at her. And how many civilians do you suggest we crush in the process? Lyra's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. Khal turned back to the map. His finger traced the jagged edge of the Sable Valley, where flamebound sympathizers had sabotaged a railgun shipment just days prior. A massacre had followed. 23 dead. Children among them. He hadn't ordered the retaliation. His generals had, yet the world blamed him. As he dismissed the war council, Khal remained alone, standing before the balcony as a gentle snowfall began to dust the ruins below. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. He thought of her. Aurelia, wrapped in that worn command cloak, her hair tousled by mountain winds, her voice quiet but unshakable. He remembered Emberfall. He remembered the way she walked away. And he remembered the way it broke him. In the silence of the spire, Khal pulled from his coat a small, scorched object, the knife she had left behind years ago, during training. Its edge was dulled, but her mark, etched in her blood, remained untouched. He held it for a long time, then whispered to the wind. I don't want to rule a kingdom of ash. But he had no one left to answer. Not even her. Episode 2. The Council Falls. The Grand Chamber of the Velmoran High Council once stood as the symbol of balance, a place where ancient laws met modern governance, where voices clashed not with steel but with conviction. Its circular dais of obsidian, inlaid with silver lines to represent the unity of all provinces, had not seen war within its walls in nearly a century. Until Khal Rourke walked in under guard. The doors burst open like cannon fire. Khal strode into the chamber clad not in ceremony but in his war gear, ashen cloak, armor beneath his coat, eyes like forged steel. The remaining council members rose in outrage, some trembling, some defiant. You violate this space, shouted Senator Rurik, a relic from the last regime. This is not a battlefield. Khal stopped in the center of the room. The echo of his boots silenced further cries. Then it is the last place left untouched by the rot, he replied. Gasps followed. One councillor fainted. He faced them with no script, no fanfare. You've watched Velmora bleed for decades. You rationed weapons for loyalty. You let regions starve to keep your numbers clean. You made heroes into ghosts because they refused to be your pawns. His voice rose, not in anger, but in thunderous truth. You swore oaths to protect this land. And you failed. There was a pause. Then the chamber filled with sound. Not from Kale, but from the gallery above, where citizens had been quietly allowed to watch. Their applause began like a ripple, then grew into a storm. Not all supported Kale, but many had suffered under the council's cold rule. Senator Rurik shouted, "You'll burn for this." Kale approached him, quietly, calmly. "I already have," he said, placing a black crest of authority on the council's marble table. "You're relieved. All of you." Then he turned, and to the stunned gasps of the elite, gave a final order. "The council is dissolved. Velmora will no longer be governed by those who do not fight." What followed was swift and surgical. That same night, Kale's strike team seized regional archives, freezing accounts and exposing private correspondences between council members and insurgent groups. Holoscreens across the nation lit up with classified footage, evidence of corruption, backdoor weapons deals, and peace negotiations used as delay tactics while civilians died. Public opinion, already frayed, split down the middle. Some hailed Kale as a liberator. Others whispered he had become Velmora's first warlord. Aurelia, watching from Tarnhal, said nothing when her advisors asked if they should respond. But later, in her quarters, she stood before a map and pinned a marker through the council's now vacant seat. She wanted justice, she whispered to herself. He gave her vengeance. She closed her eyes, as if mourning a grave she'd never be allowed to visit. The capital had changed. The council was no more. But Kale did not celebrate. In his private study, lit only by the flicker of fire, he read the last journal entry of a senator who had taken his own life rather than be tried. Velmora is no longer governed by law. She is ruled by will. The flame has found its sword. Kale set the journal down and stared out into the smoke-choked horizon. And whispered her name. Aurelia. Episode 3. The General's Mask. They called her the Ghost of Firefront, but that name had long been left behind in the ashes. Now, they called her General Ice, or among her enemies, simply the Mask. Aurelia Trent, once a prodigy, once a lover, now led the Flamebound from behind a veil, both literal and symbolic. She wore a half-mask of black steel when addressing her forces, an emblem not of secrecy but of singular focus. "The face is a luxury," she once told a frightened cadet. "In war, what matters is the will." The Flamebound had no official capital, no central army. They were a tide, fluid, responsive, and impossible to pin down. Their banners were stitched with the symbol of two broken swords crossed over flame, a quiet promise that they were born from the fragments of something once whole. Aurelia moved among them not as an icon, but as a commander. She ate with soldiers in makeshift tents. She patched wounds alongside field medics. And when the time came, she led charges with such precision that old veterans often remarked, "She moves like prophecy." Yet despite her outward composure, Aurelia had begun to fracture inside. The reports she received nightly weighed heavier with each sunrise. Kale's new regime was efficient, even brilliant. The streets were cleaner, food lines shorter, and petty warlords across the northern frontier had mysteriously vanished. The people were safer. But the price was freedom. Any voice that rose in dissent vanished. Any village accused of harboring flamebound sympathizers suffered power cuts and isolation. Surveillance drones patrolled towns with predatory grace. Aurelia stood at the center of this shifting world, watching the man she once kissed beneath the fractured sky turn into the storm they had sworn to stop. One night, while overlooking the snow-draped ridges near Tarnhal, Aurelia summoned her oldest friend in the resistance, Captain Lysa Veer. "He's winning," Lysa said without ceremony. "The world is quieter under him." "Quiet isn't peace," Aurelia replied. "No, but the people don't care. They care about eating. About living without fear." Aurelia's voice was a whisper. "Even if it means kneeling." Lysa didn't answer. Aurelia turned toward the horizon, where distant cities pulsed like embers in the dark. "I once believed we were the same," He and I, she said. That even if we broke, we'd rebuild something together. Lysa stepped closer. And now? Aurelia touched the hilt of her sword, the same one Kale had gifted her after Shardak Ridge. Now I wear a mask, she murmured. So I don't have to watch myself lose him again. Later that night, alone, she removed the mask. In the cracked mirror of her quarters, she saw not a general, not a legend, but a woman haunted by love twisted into opposition. And as the candle burned low, she whispered into the dark. If there's a part of you left, fight it. Or I'll have to. Episode 4. Echoes in the Icewind Barracks. The Icewind Barracks stood like a crown of stone atop the eastern cliffs of Velmora, a fortress from a bygone era, once home to Aurelia's training company during her earliest days in the academy. Now, Kale had reclaimed it. To the public, it was a symbolic gesture, restoring the barracks where Velmora's best were forged. To Kale, it was something else entirely. A shrine to what was lost. And a reminder of the only person who could still stop him. He walked the empty corridors alone, fingers brushing the walls as if the stone might speak to him. Ghosts followed him here, echoes of drill instructors barking orders, boots pounding against frost-slick floors, Aurelia's laughter, rare, but once real, floating in from the sparring arena. In the training chamber, he found the old observation deck, where cadets once stood to receive commands or discipline. He stood there now, gazing down at the war room below. It was here that they had first fought as teammates. It was here they had touched hands in mutual victory. And it was here he first wondered what it would be like to die beside her, rather than live apart. A new officer entered. General Marich Volin, Kale's chief intelligence commander. We've finished reactivating the eastern sensor net, Volin said crisply. Tarn Hal's energy signature is increasing. We believe they're preparing a long-range strike. Kale turned. And casualties? If they hit Irongate Junction? Thousands. Kale's brow furrowed. Aurelia doesn't do random destruction. It's not her. Perhaps she's changing, Volin said coolly. Just as you did. Kale gave him a long look. No, she only escalates when she's given no choice. Volin hesitated. Then give her one. Later that evening, Kale stood before the Icewind Memorial Wall. It bore the names of every cadet who had died before graduation. Aurelia's parents' names were there, old entries, forgotten by most, but not by him. He traced them silently. Then, with trembling hands, he placed a file into the base of the wall, a personal message encoded only for Aurelia, set to activate if she ever returned. A recording. In it, he sat before the old barracks hearth, eyes hollow, voice raw. I thought if I built something powerful enough, I could protect you from it all. From the world, from yourself. But I see now I wasn't building for you. I was building over you. He looked into the camera, not like a general, but like a man. If this is where it ends, let it be somewhere we both knew what it meant to be human. Far to the west, in Tarn Hal, Aurelia received a secure transmission. Her officers looked to her for a decision. She said nothing. Only walked away, message in hand, and locked her door behind her. What she heard next would haunt her. Episode 5. War Songs in the South. In the sun-scorched lowlands of South Velmora, the wind carried a strange melody, part tribal hymn, part military cadence, echoing through the broken remains of villages and the dense tangle of scorched forest. Locals called it the war song, a rhythm that marked the coming of fire and rebellion. It was the sound of the flame-bound rising. This was no longer a war of politics. It was a war of belief, one born from broken trust, where soldiers became symbols and rebels became saviors. And in the south, Aurelia's forces were not hiding anymore. They were recruiting. The village of Riethenveld, once a farming commune reduced to rubble by Kale's reclamation squads, now served as the beating heart of Aurelia's southern operations. Tents sprawled like a nomad city, filled with engineers rebuilding drones from scrap, medics treating refugees, and scouts mapping Kale's movements with hand-drawn charts and AI intercepts. Aurelia arrived in silence. No fanfare. No escort beyond her personal guard. She walked among the people, her face partially unmasked, her cloak streaked with travel dust. Children ran to her, many orphaned by the early conflicts. She knelt, speaking to each by name. These were the faces she carried into every battlefield. The reason she hadn't broken. Captain Lysa Veer approached with a field tablet. Kale's response to our last strike was swift. No civilian losses, but his message was clear. Aurelia tapped the screen. Footage played. A precision strike on a flame-bound depot. No bodies, just destruction. And at the end, painted across the wreckage in chalk. This ends when you say it does. Later, in the main command tent, Aurelia met with her southern commanders. All veterans, each scarred by Velmora's transformation. "We've begun intercepting sympathizers," said Commander Yoran, once a provincial governor who defected after Kale's rise. "Kale's regime is keeping the cities running, but at what cost? People are turning to us. Not because we're stronger, but because we're right." "And what happens when the right doesn't win?" Aurelia asked. Yoran's jaw tightened. "Then we become the myth that guides the next fight." That night, as the firelight flickered against the canvas of her quarters, Aurelia took out the recording Kale had left in the Icewind barracks. She listened to it again. Not as a general, but as the woman who once walked beside him under shattered skies. His voice, raw and tired, whispered through the static. "I was building over you." She closed her eyes. And whispered back, as if he could hear her across the endless field of war. "Then tear it down. I'll help you, but only if you ask." Outside, the war songs rose again. This time, louder. And Aurelia, flamebound by duty and haunted by love, sang with them. Episode 6. The Flamebound Strikes. The storm came at dawn. Not with thunder or lightning, but with silent wings and the soft click of detonators being armed. After months of evasive strikes and subversive warfare, the Flamebound launched the boldest operation yet, Operation Emberfall, a full-scale assault on one of Kale Rourke's most critical strategic hubs, the Velran Comms Array. It was no longer sabotage. This was war, declared without words. The Velran Array was the nerve center of Kale's surveillance empire. From its spires, data flowed across all of Velmora. Supply convoys, patrol routes, drone telemetry, even population sentiment algorithms. To most, it was an untouchable fortress. But Aurelia had once helped design its perimeter protocol when she was still a student at the academy. And she remembered the flaws no one else did. That's how she got inside. The operation unfolded in 3 phases. Phase 1. Decoy teams launched a staged attack at the outer security bunkers. Aerial scouts planted false sensor trails mimicking full squadrons. Kale's command responded with immediate force, dispatching elite units to the south. Phase 2. Aurelia and her core team, 12 of her most trusted field captains, infiltrated the array through a maintenance tunnel she had used over a decade ago during a cadet trial. The corridors still bore graffiti from her classmates. Ghosts on the walls. Phase 3. The strike. They reached the central data tower in under 40 minutes. Explosives were placed with surgical precision. And just as Aurelia prepared to issue the detonation command, her comm crackled. Not from her team. From him. Aurelia. Kale's voice was quiet, almost reverent. He sounded close. Too close. "You don't have to do this. Pull your team back. I'll let you walk away. No arrests. No pursuit. Just stop this before it becomes irreversible." Aurelia's hands didn't tremble, but her eyes did. "You've been watching me?" she asked. "For weeks." She stood by the central core, hands hovering over the detonator. "You said I could end this," she replied. "I'm doing that now." "No, you're starting something we can't stop." Something that will burn past both of us. She looked at the team behind her. Each of them ready. Each of them waiting. Her fingers closed around the trigger. Kale's voice softened. If you press that, I won't be able to protect you anymore. Aurelia's reply was colder than snow. Then stop protecting me, fight me, or walk away. She pressed the trigger. The explosion was controlled, targeted to cripple data cores without mass casualties. But the shockwaves of that decision would ripple through every corner of Velmora. Kale watched from his private command terminal. As the array's data feeds went dark one by one, his face remained expressionless. Only once the room was empty did he whisper. Then war it is. Episode 7. The Silent Betrayer. The attack on the Velran comms array sent shockwaves through the nation, but it was not the explosion that truly broke Velmora. It was the silence that followed. For the first time since Kale's rise, information flow halted. The capital went dark. Surveillance feeds blacked out. Panic swept through high command. Military channels sputtered with only fragments of what had occurred. And in that void, betrayal bloomed. General Marich Volin, Kale's chief intelligence officer and the architect of the surveillance network, stood in the shadows of the spire's west wing, flanked by his private guard. His eyes did not hold panic. They held opportunity. He had warned Kale against underestimating Aurelia. He had built contingency plans Kale never approved. And in his hand now, he held the final stroke, a command file labeled Protocol Blackglass. It was a trap buried in the system's core, triggered only if the network was breached. It would restore command, but also launch automated strikes on nodes linked to the Flamebound. Kale had specifically forbidden it. But Volin no longer answered to Kale. He answered to the growing murmur within the regime. The true loyalists who believed Kale had grown too hesitant, too emotional. Aurelia had weakened him. Now, they would finish what he could not. The strikes began at dawn. 5 flamebound outposts leveled within hours. Civilian shelters, accidentally, caught in the blasts. And at the center of the chaos, an intercepted message, forged in Kale's name. No more mercy. No more delay. The ghost dies now. Aurelia received the report while evacuating wounded from a southern haven. The flames still clung to the sky. Her hands were streaked with soot and blood. The message, Kale's message, hit like a thunderclap. So he had chosen. So this was what love had become. Back in the capital, Kale awoke to shouts and alerts. His comms flared with urgent voices. He saw the footage. Fires, corpses, craters. Then he saw the authorization tag. His own. He turned to Volin. What did you do? Volin didn't lie. I ended the illusion. She's not coming back. And neither are you. The guards turned on Kale. There was no trial. No formal betrayal. Just a stun charge to the base of the neck and a steel cell beneath the spire, hidden from the world. The man who had once ruled Velmora now sat in chains, betrayed not by a soldier, but by loyalty twisted into fear. And as the embers rose from the southern sky, Aurelia looked up and made a vow. This ends, one way or another. Episode 8. Chains of the Capital. The chamber beneath the Spire of Oaths was never meant to hold a man like Kale Rourke. Carved into the foundation of Velmora's oldest building, it had no windows, no lights, only iron and silence. A relic from the days when dissidents were forgotten by daylight. Now, it held the very architect of the new Velmora, stripped of title, command, and name. They didn't call him Supreme General anymore. They called him the Usurper. Kale sat on a cold slab, blood still drying on his temple where the stun bolt had grazed his skull. His coat had been taken. His boots too, but not the small token hidden in his inner lining. A half-burned photo of Aurelia from their early cadet days, grainy and faded, torn from a dossier he once refused to destroy. He looked at it now, his only link to the world outside the steel door. He didn't ask why they betrayed him. He had always known they would. Up above, General Volin moved quickly. He addressed the nation through falsified broadcasts. Footage of Kale's mental decline was doctored, staged moments of paranoia, clipped sentences made to seem like confessions of guilt. Kale Rourke, he declared, was compromised. He jeopardized our safety. I've assumed control to restore order. We will not bow to ghosts. Behind the speeches, Volin prepared for full-scale war. His first target, Tarn Hal. But not all had turned. A young intelligence officer named Corin Fael, once loyal to Kale's ideals, stumbled upon a backup feed, one of Kale's last personal entries, recorded the night before the flamebound strike. Corin watched it in secret. Kale, alone, seated in his quarters, spoke as if to someone unseen. If this ends with us on opposite sides of a battlefield, I want you to know I never stopped believing in you. I chose strength to protect weakness. I chose command to shield hope. I chose you, even when you walked away. Corin copied the file and vanished. Meanwhile, in Tarn Hal, Aurelia gathered her top commanders. The war was no longer shadows and tactics. It was revolution, retaliation, fire. But then came the message. Not from Kale. From Corin. Encoded, risky, honest. Aurelia played it in the silence of her war room. Kale's face, his voice, unfiltered. I chose you. She replayed it. And again. And again. Later that night, as battle plans were finalized, Aurelia gave one new command. We break the spire. Gasps, questions, panic. But her voice silenced all. If he's alive, we free him. If he's dead, we bury the truth with honor. Someone asked, and if it's a trap? Aurelia's eyes were like tempered glass. Then we go into hell and take it apart one brick at a time. Kale Rourke, chained beneath the capital he helped rebuild, smiled faintly in the dark. Because he knew her. And he knew. She was coming. Episode 9. Broken Banners. The march on the capital did not begin with banners or horns. It began with silence. A line of flame-bound soldiers crested the southern ridge just before dawn, their movements quiet, measured, no speeches, no fanfare. They wore no insignias but the twin broken swords stitched over their hearts. Behind them came medics, engineers, signal runners, and hundreds of volunteers, not soldiers, but citizens who had lost everything to a war they never asked for. They came not to conquer, but to end. Inside the spire, General Volin stood at the center of a spiral of command chaos. Reports flooded in, resistance cells uniting, military offices refusing orders, even former loyalist governors declaring neutrality. Velmora's people were done with fear. Prepare the city defenses, Volin growled. We'll meet them at the Iron Gate. His subordinates hesitated. You want us to open fire on civilians? One whispered. They're following Aurelia Trent. She's no civilian. Meanwhile, deep beneath the spire, Kale Rourke waited in the dark. Every hour felt like a century. Every rumble above reminded him the world was moving without him. Toward fire, toward judgment, toward her. Then, a sound he never thought he'd hear again. Gunfire. Close. Controlled. Strategic. And footsteps. Not boots pounding in panic. But her footsteps. The cell door exploded inward. Aurelia stood there, not as a memory, not as a ghost, but as the storm made flesh. Her hair was pulled back in a warrior's knot. Her face was streaked with soot and steel resolve. Her eyes met his. Neither spoke for a breath. Then Kale laughed. Just once. I told them you'd come. She stepped forward, keys in hand, unlocking the shackles that bound him. You shouldn't have made me. They emerged together into chaos. The city streets burned, not with destruction, but with awakening. Civilians fought alongside rebel soldiers. Loyalists defected mid-battle. The flame-bound didn't destroy buildings. They took comm towers, power grids, military checkpoints. They tore down not the city, but the infrastructure of fear. At the Iron Gate, Volin stood alone. He watched as the twin figures approached, one in crimson armor, one in tattered grey, Aurelia and Kale, side by side. He raised his rifle. Kale stepped in front of Aurelia. "No," she said. "He's mine." The duel was short. Volin was skilled, ruthless, but driven by arrogance. Aurelia moved like memory, like prophecy. Her blade cut through his guard, his ambition, his last lie. She didn't kill him. She left him kneeling in defeat. "I'm not your executioner," she said. "I'm the reason you'll have to live with what you did." As the Flamebound raised their crest over the spire, a new banner was born, not of conquest, not of command, but of reclamation. Velmora was not whole. But it was free. Episode 10. Nightfall at the Iron Gate. Night came gently over Velmora for the first time in years. Not beneath sirens or smoke, but beneath quiet. A silence so deep, it felt like reverence. Fires had been extinguished, weapons sheathed. The streets no longer rang with the echo of boots or the crack of gunfire. Only the soft hush of rebuilding and mourning. At the Iron Gate, where the final confrontation ended mere hours before, Kale Rourke sat on the lowest step, arms resting on his knees. His uniform was torn, his hair damp with sweat, blood drying on his temple, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been in months. He watched the people of Velmora move through the rubble. Not in fear, but with purpose. They cleared roads, patched broken conduits, set up medical tents, and sang songs in old dialects, war songs reborn as hymns of healing. He was no longer the general. He was just a man who'd lost and been returned. Aurelia stood behind him, silent. He didn't need to turn to know she was there. "Will they forgive me?" Kale asked after a long moment. "That's not what matters," Aurelia said. "They don't need to forgive you. They need to see what comes next." "And what does come next?" She hesitated. "I don't know, but for the first time, we get to decide together." They talked until the stars emerged, about strategy, and grief, and names of soldiers lost to the silence. Kale told her of the cell beneath the spire, where he counted each heartbeat and each regret. She told him of the fire in the southern towns, of the families who joined her without hope, only resolve. It was not reconciliation. It was recognition. Two warriors who had once loved, once fought, and now stood on the other side of a world they almost destroyed. At the height of night, they stood before the remnants of the Iron Gate, the symbol of Velmoran might, now broken, bent inward as if the very earth had bowed. Aurelia reached into her coat and drew out a knife. Kale tensed, but she smiled faintly. It was his old combat blade, the one she had taken so many years ago. She pressed it into his hand. "No more vows," she said. "Just truth." He closed his fingers around it. And nodded. Later, they watched the people raise a new standard in the plaza. A banner woven not of gold or blood, but deep velvet blue, edged with two halves of a phoenix facing opposite directions. Not rising. Not falling. But watching. Balancing. To be continued.